Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OGGN Oil Talk, the official podcast of the Oil and Gas Governance Network. Today, our topic is Guyana Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, GYEITI. What is it, and why should we care about transparency in Guyana? I'm your guest host today. My name is Janet Bolkan. We're really pleased to have you, the listener, tuning in. Our guest is Mr. Mike McCormack. Mike was born in the north of England. He was educated in the UK and the USA. He has a master's in economics, philosophy, and industrial relations. Mike first came to Guyana in 1967. He was associated with the Jesuits in connection with research for higher studies. Mike then returned between 1970 and 1972, during which time he taught at the University of Guyana, UG. He played rugby for Guyana. Between 1972 and 1976, Mike was director of Oxfam's development programs in the Andean region. He was based in Lima, and Oxfam is an international NGO. In 1976, Mike returned to Guyana. He was an original founder of the Guyana Human Rights Association, GHRA. And Mike has been engaged in human rights activism ever since. I just want to give you a small introduction to the listener to the OGGN, the Oil and Gas Governance Network. This was founded in the summer of 2017. OGGN is composed of Guyanese at home and abroad. It's a registered 501c3 nonprofit NGO in New York. OGGN recognizes that oil will feature prominently in Guyana's future for decades to come, and that is why OGGN is committed to thinking long-term. OGGN's mission is to advocate for the rule of law, for environmental protection, and strict financial norms when it comes to oil exploration and production in Guyana. Whether you're listening locally or you are one of the many Guyanese living in the diaspora, our hope is that we can keep you informed about events connected with governance and oil and gas in Guyana. OGGN is independent, and we actively advocate for transparency, accountability, and good governance. Okay, so now to our guest. Mike, we've been hearing some acronyms for quite a long time. LCDS, for example, the Low Carbon Development Strategy, is one that I think most Guyanese are familiar with. But today we would like to explore with you another acronym, EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. First, I'd like to ask you about EITI internationally. What is its purpose? When was it created? Who belongs to EITI, and how does it function?
Well, thank you, Jan, and thank you to OGGN for the invitation to this interview. Much appreciated. Before I get to just before responding to your question, I should point out that while I was only one of a number of the founders of the GHRA. It wasn't I founded it by any means, but that was just a little clarification. With respect to EITI, its origins go back to the 1990s when there was a growing concern, particularly it was in the developed nations where the concern was being expressed, but it was largely about what was going on in some of the least known countries in the world with respect to the extractive industries. And it was people like George Soros and the Revenue Institute and Tony Blair and Publish What You Pay in the UK, people and organizations of that nature who were raising concerns which eventually gelled into a conference in London the early 2000s, I think it's about 2003, of about 5 separate countries, and Trinidad and Tobago being among them. And they came to create, they didn't actually create EITI, but they created what was the forerunner to EITI. This sounds a bit complicated and messy, but that is actually the origins and the continuance of EITI organizationally. Seemed more complicated, but we'll get back to that later on. So it was in that period that issues relating to oil exploration in Angola and Azerbaijan and Ghana and a number of the lesser known countries in the world. This EITI wasn't simply the product of developed countries. It was the way developed countries were functioning in other parts of the world, which eventually led to this peculiar attempt to address and issues that involved governments and they involved businesses, and the consequences were felt by ordinary people. So Guyana became a member of this rather
So,
unwieldy...
Mike, before we get to Guyana,
Oh, sorry.
yes, how does the ITI function internationally?
It functions internationally by, and it evolved into this, what it is now, that 3 sectors, the extractive sector, the government, and the civil society, formed this sort of collective governance organization. Governance, just to be, since I'll be using that word a lot, I need to explain the manner in which I'm using it and we choose here. I mean, governments comprise parliament or some kind of assembly that sets policy. You then, and that's the political administration, you then have the civil service or its equivalent that implements policy and the laws that are passed by government. But it's very clear that those two are not enough. Frequently, problems arise that require solutions that are cobbled together and by civil society, by business, by joint initiatives. And this is what it's that kind of activity that is captured by the way EITI functions, that the administrative structures of the in the extractive industries, like in our case in Guyana, GGMC and the Ministry
That's the
of
Guyana Geology and Mines Commission.
Sorry, that's correct. I should have said that. They are the official agencies responsible for it, extraction, but they are, for various reasons, very deficient. We can come back to that. At the moment, we're looking at the fact that the origins of Publish What You Pay were prompted by the limitations of the existing government structures. And we're using the term governance here to cover a range of initiatives taken by different aspects of the society, not the elected representatives who have been unable to address this.
Thanks, Mike.
Is that helpful?
The very helpful. So globally, EITI, where is it headquartered and what is its role vis-a-vis member countries?
Okay. The EITI now has 58, 58 maybe 59, 16 by now, member countries. And it's the country that opts to become a member. And within the country, the EITI structure comprises the three sectors I mentioned. The government has a part, the business have a part, and EITI and civic have a part, and they all have equal voice. I would say votes, but in fact, voting is very rare. The whole thrust of EITI is to find a compromise solution to crises which the existing laws and administration are not capable of addressing. In other words, EITI works best in crises, and it's as a response to problems which are, for a variety of reasons we can discuss, not being addressed by the formal government structure. And internationally, there is a similar board, international board, that again comprises the three sectors. The member countries, the civic sector, for example, in each of the member countries elects an international civic component, and business do the same, and governments do the same. And so you get what ostensibly are very unwieldy boards, both nationally and internationally, but as we can see, as we discuss here, it is effective, and it can be a solution to many more areas in our view. I don't know if that's
Mike,
helpful,
that's great.
John.
And I think just to say, where does the Secretariat of the Global EITI, where is that headquartered?
That is located in Norway, and yes, there's the Executive Secretariat, and then there's the International Board. And it's the Secretariat that each national secretary, I should say, in each society, in each country where there's membership, they try to have a national secretariat, and so they relate to the International Secretariat.
That's excellent, Mike. Thank you so much for that introduction to the Global Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI. And you mentioned that there are 59 countries, perhaps, which are members of EITI, and Guyana is one, GYEITI. Can you say a bit about when GYEITI was created? You mentioned the three components, but any additional information on those components would be fascinating for our listeners.
Generally speaking,
we're not
in Guyana yet. You're talking
we are in Guyana now.
Oh, we're in Guyana now.
Yes, okay.
Right. Well,
go ahead.
As in most of the other places where EITI has developed, and one of the impulses to create it is a lack of trust in both governments and companies' capacity to address, in our case, the very serious issues generated in the extractive sector, primarily in the areas of gold mining and in the oil and gas sector. And so we here have a business grouping, for example, in the EITI that largely comprises representatives from the oil companies and from the gold companies. And in theory, forestry, but forestry hasn't always had a representative on it. And those are selected by the business grouping itself. So their representatives and whoever they choose. And here, for example, in Guyana, the oil and gas people have one of four. Each sector in Guyana has 4 members elected by the sector itself. And within the business community, one of those sectors always comes from oil and gas, and one always comes from the gold mining. Sometimes fisheries is represented, but not always. And it depends on how the business community who it wants to elect. And so that's the business sector. We could come back to how the civic sector is selected, because there are some unusual features to that. And the government, for its part, chooses 4 of its members over the last few years. GRA has been represented, that the
GRA is the Guyana
Revenue
Revenue.
Authority, the Guyana Geology and Mines have had a representative, and the Ministry of Finance is represented. And the government chooses, again, people that it wants to have on there. They heavily represent the finance and extractive areas of government.
That's fascinating, Mike. So the 4 representatives from government, 4 from industry, 4 from civil society, together these make up what you call the multi-stakeholder group, the MSG?
That's correct. And the multi-stakeholder group is the authority of EITI. It's not the government or the Ministry of Natural Resources or Ministry of Finance and so on. It's these elected representatives in the multi-stakeholder group that is responsible for all major decisions. We here in Guyana are recognizing the fact that the agencies which come together to comprise the MSG have very different opinions on and interpretations of what is taking place in the extractive sector in Guyana. And so if we want to move forward and agree on decisions, we have to be very conscious of that fact. And what it means is that any decision that we would like, for example, Civic, wants to see passed by the MSG, you have to approach that in a way of asking, well, what do the other 2, what would they agree to? And what do they get out of this? And the whole idea of the EITI is not that you can capture it and get it fully behind you. It's always a compromise. Everybody needs to get something of a win out of each decision.
Exactly.
And it's a big challenge. Initially, we thought this was going to be hard to do because you have strong opinions on the business side. The business companies largely focus on substance. Civic tend to be more concerned about process. And so you've got to work through that, a difference of approaches. And we can talk about how successfully that might have been done since 2016 when we first came into existence.
Thank you, Mike. So you mentioned at the beginning the genesis of EITI globally was through a recognition of the lack of trust among these players in extractive industries, in civil society. And so I can well imagine, coming to a position of consensus and building a good relationship takes time. And that's what, as you explained, the MSG aims to do. One other sort of admin question: when you look at when someone goes to look at one of the annual reports of the EITI, of GYEITI, it's produced by a separate entity. I think one was called the BDO. Can you explain the role of BDO, or the entity that produces the annual report? How is that hired?
Right. just before we get to that, a final comment on the approaches to EITI. It's important. EITI works well when everybody has something to gain by being part of the agreement and lots to lose by not being part of it. So this concept of collective decision making and consensus is key. I think we've had one vote since 2016. The International Committee of EITI has never had a vote. They've always stuck with trying to find something that everyone can buy into. It's not what anybody really wants, but there's enough in it to make it worthwhile to go along with the decision making. That's the kind of approach we have here. Now, what does EITI do? The main purpose of EITI is to get more transparency on the financial flows within the extractive sector. In other words, how much money do the companies make, and how much money do the companies pay the government? So in other words, over the course of a year, EITI will produce a report which reflects the flow of finances from the sectors, the extractive sectors, to the government. You're talking their taxes, duties, the royalties, all the different forms in which there are financial flows into the government, and from the government agencies, Ministry of Finance, GGMC, Guyana Revenue Authority, and so on, NICIL. How much money do they take in and how much money goes on? And so the goal is to produce a report that has reliable information of that nature. In order to strengthen the credibility of the report, every year, one of the important decisions taken by the MSG is who will produce this report. And a reputable international auditing firm has been selected each year to undertake this job. There's the biggest auditing firm in the world. Originally,
Deloitte and Touche? Is it Deloitte?
No, BDO.
BDO.
I'm not sure what the BDO stands for. Prior to being called BDO, the organization had another name. So they are hired and they move in, they bring a team of people, and they, first of all, identify what percentage of the monies can you realistically try to cover in the course of a year. So the first thing that happens is it's established for example, all the gold mining companies, you could say, that had revenues over $30, $40 million. If that captures 95% of the revenue, it gets cut off there. So it's not every company in mining and every miner that has a license that is expected to provide this information. It's only those companies, then usually you're talking about maybe 20 or max 30 of companies. If you take all them together, you get 95% of the industry is covered.
Yeah.
So you identify, first of all, what the cutoff point will be, and then the company that's been hired we'll get in touch with them. They do workshops with them as to the way in which information should be presented and what kind of information they're interested in. And similarly with the government ministries, they also produce the information. It comes in to the agency that's been hired, and they, in collaboration with the MSG, work through this and produce different drafts of the reports, and eventually a final report that the MSG must agree with. The technical agency produces the best report to their ability, but it's the MSG that have to approve it.
Thanks,
It's
Mike.
not the Ministry of Finance, it's not the government's report, it's this independent bodies.
It's the independent multi-stakeholder group.
Right.
So, Mike, you've laid out a very admirable process of governance process for us, and I'm thinking about the Guyana we live in now, where there have been 3 parliamentary sessions only since for this year, or maybe since since a new government was sworn in, where there's no fixed parliamentary timetable. Quite astonishing. Does the MSG have a fixed timetable, or how does it work in practice? How are meetings organized? Are they
But
fixed?
there is a monthly meeting, which, when we first started in the MSG, used to always be an in-person meeting. After the pandemic, they've all been Zoom meetings, and there's been a notable lowering of the quality of the work of the MSG, because we're not just dealing with data. You're dealing with values, with strongly held opinions, and the personal interaction of the 3 sectors, and managing that effectively is a very important part of this being a successful venture. And the idea of the trust, I mentioned earlier the idea of the companies only being concerned with, not only, largely concerned with substance, and civic with process, has been manifest in the fact that we don't actually meet now. And one of my recommendations would be, or has been, that we have to get back to in-person meetings, or some way in which the 3 sectors actually interact and try and create this consensus that I've been mentioning.
Yes, I completely agree, Mike. I was reading a couple of days ago after the Carter Center released its report on the 2025 elections. I want to give a shout out to the Carter Center. They mentioned that in 2016, and for a year, they supported Guyana as it prepared its candidacy for membership of the GYEITI, its country candidacy, and which was received formally in October, I think, of 2017. So another thank you to the Carter Center for that role that it played. Mike, can we shift over to talking about Policy Forum Guyana, another acronym, PFG? Can you tell us a little bit about PFG and its role in the GYEITI?
Right, yes. This is important that people understand this. When Guyana first decided to become a member country, and that was in 2016, Guyana had had contact with the EITI prior to that. The previous government, in fact, since about 2011, there'd been visits from EITI, and government representatives would go to meetings with EITI, but there was no evidence of it actually taking form in terms of a government section, or rather a Guyana section of EITI, and no moves were made to actually join. But the coalition government decided that we should take this further and become a member. And the then Minister of Natural Resources,
Trotman? Mr. Raphael Trotman?
that's right, thank you. Raphael Trotman got in touch initially with the Guyana Human Rights Association and asked, would we be willing to address the issue of how civic components of MSG should be created. Well, the GHRA thanked him for the confidence in the association, but suggested that rather than we do it, we were quite prepared to do it, but we thought that the Policy Forum Guyana, which was a coalition of agencies that included indigenous, women, disabilities, human rights, was a broader-based civic body, and that should be reflected in the choice of the MSG Civic. So Minister Troutman was quite happy with that, and so he then wrote and appointed PFG. Mm-hmm. What PFG did in terms of the selection, when we got around to selecting the first civic component, was appoint a committee that was Major General retired Joe Singh, the former Elections Commissioner Rudy Collins, and a lady Sandra, I can't recall Sandra's name. She was a human resources specialist. And we asked those three to actually do the selection. We widely advertised the idea of EITI and what being a member of Civic would entail. And we asked that individuals apply in their own capacity, personal capacity, but that part of the application had to indicate what their contribution to civil society had been. Mm-hmm. Had they been members of civil society organizations, had they worked and sponsored civil society work and so on. So there was a combination of the individual was applying, but the application had to show solid work with civil society. The three members committee then recommended to EITI who the four members of the applicants they thought best suited the purpose of EITI. And so in addition to the four members, four alternates were also identified so that each member had someone who, if he or she were unable to attend a meeting or thing, then the alternate would step in. In fact, in order that alternates understood what they were getting involved with, they were also allowed to attend meetings. They didn't have a vote, but they had a voice. So that then was a 3-yearly process, which EITI has done on 3 occasions, repeated a process of that nature. The individual persons selected have differed from the original 3. They, I think, may have done 2, but people of equal background, well known, well respected by our range of the society, they are the ones who have been elected, have been the selectors of EITI's civic component.
So, Mike, that you've laid out a really admirable process, democratic and building trust to get the civic members of the MSG selected. And you played that role, or PFG played that role until what year? From 2017 until when?
Until last year.
Until 2020.
January 2025 was the last time the PFG implemented that process. And the process was always implemented in conjunction with the Ministry of Natural Resources, because the newspaper advertisements were paid for through the Office of the Permanent Secretary. And so while we did the work, the ministry was involved. We submitted that list in April. It started in January, but with the, first of all, advertising, then people submitting their applications, and then organizing interviews with the committee, and then the final selection process. It took until the beginning of April when we submitted our list to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Natural Resources, as had happened from the beginning. There is a crisis at the moment in the EITI. Should we go into that now, Jan?
I think we should leave that crisis for a bit. I think for our
Okay.
general listeners, we can, up until January of 2025, this you've described an admirable process, in fact, of building trust between the civic group and the ministry and the industrial group. So I would like to dig a little deeper, delve a little deeper into an example of a sector that's tracked by, that was and is being tracked by GYEITI. And let's just take mining, for example. You mentioned gold mining. So which agencies or agency has to furnish reports and data to BDO as it prepares its GYEITI annual report? Which sectors in mining?
Well, virtually all three sectors, in the sense that they have the information from the individual companies. That is the basis of the data that goes into the reports. The Gold and Diamond Miners Association, as a corporate body, is the agency responsible for selecting the gold representatives on the MSG, and they interact with the international administrator, as they're called. That's the company that's hired to do the work. And then also there are other agencies that have concerns related to mining, and those concerns are not simply the financial value of the money, but also the environmental impact and the gender impact of mining is now a requirement for reports as established by the International Board. And those recommendations are embodied in what's known as the International Standard. That's like the constitution of EITI overall. And it's renovated periodically to incorporate changes which are taking place. And now, for example, the environmental dimension of that report addresses issues such as the impact of mercury, the import and export of mercury from Guyana, the impact on indigenous communities, both in the domestic life, but also the impact of mining on communities. So there are a variety of sources which influence eventual recommendations with respect to gold mining.
So really, so you mentioned at the beginning of this talk, Mike, that maybe the companies which comprise the lion's share of importance in terms of volume or value, which are then tracked by EITI. So when these companies submit their data, let's say gold mining companies, is there triangulation? Is there anyone who checks as to the accuracy of those submissions?
GGMC also submits its information to the international administrators. The annexes to the report run to thousands of pages, and they contain all the licensing information that not only is the new licensing for the particular year, but also the licenses which are still extant, which are still valid, that were approved some years earlier. So you have a very clear indication of how many licenses any particular individual owns. The largest group of miners the largest mining activity in Guyana involving Guyanese are what are known as medium-scale mining. And these are mining operations on up to 1,200 acres of land. So that each report and annexes contain the details of every license, medium scale, or even small scale, but small scale are dealt with differently, that are extant. So that it's clear that some miners have hundreds of licenses, others have less. But one feature of medium-scale mining, which is of enormous concern, is the way in which what ought to be declared to be a large-scale mine, that is, any mining area beyond 1,200 acres, the manner in which miners are allowed to circumvent all of the charges which should apply to large-scale mines are broken down in the following way, that if, for example, in the Guyana, a miner is taking possession of, say, an area of 12,000 acres, rather than one license being issued on a particular date for a certain amount of money, you will find that maybe 13 licenses in the same area with the same coordinates in terms of its location in Guyana, which clearly indicates that all of these 12 or 13 licenses are contiguous. They constitute one large area, but for licensing purposes, that area is broken down and identified as 12 or 13 medium-scale licenses, which all hover below 1,200 acres. All of this information is published in the annexes of the report. Initially, the government was taken aback at the manner in which all this was done, because then people who were sufficiently able with respect to manipulating the information could produce all of this information somewhat in the manner I'm describing to you, that it's much easier to see who all the owners are, how many licenses any particular owner has, and this business of the medium-scale mining. The way now that the government or the ministry is addressing this problem of which is embarrassing because it implicates people from within the ministry. It would not be possible to buy licenses in this manner without some level of cooperation and oversight from within the GGMC itself. And so one way of both allowing the information to go out, but then making it very difficult for people to see it, is the way in which accessing the annexes has been made very difficult. You have to be quite skilled in computer skills, particularly in Excel techniques, to access all of that information. I don't know if this is helpful.
Well, I think it's really helpful because, again, I think in the news recently or in Guyana, we hear about the way public procurement is managed. So the breaking up of contracts to be under the 15 million ceiling in a way to give multiple contracts to favored FFF, family, friends, and favorites of a particular political entity. Mike, it was a letter in Kiteshore News on 14th of May, which it said, and I'll just read it, talking about EITI. More troubling are the reported alterations to previously published data sets, columns removed, including critical fields such as data granted for concessions. These are not cosmetic edits, they strike at the integrity of the record. Such actions, if verified, suggest not routine data management, but deliberate sanitization. Now, if this allegation were correct, I haven't checked it, who would inform EITI globally and locally, GYEITI? What might be the consequences of tampering with data?
I think the International Secretariat would say Guyana's got to work that out for itself. That there's the idea, for example, that if those allegations are correct, that EITI internationally will somehow repudiate the report or criticize Guyana would be misreading the relationship between the local operation and the international movement. It goes to the heart of how this information, and not only the information that EIT handles, but information generally in Guyana is managed, that if the business community are benefiting from it, they're not going to come forward and criticize it. If other sectors feel, as they do, that there's something going badly wrong in oil and gas in terms of the austerity that people are experiencing in the midst of these enormous gains that Guyana is making. The question is, how do you actually address that? Yep. There's a sense in which if EITI were more vigorous, that EITI could ensure that people or organizations which are concerned with that are having a voice and bring them together with in this collective governance mode, rather than formally, if in fact the government ministers themselves are impervious or protected from being challenged directly. But at the moment, my sense is multi-stakeholder type approaches where organizations have a concern about what's going on, but it's not the same concern, and they don't share a lot other than what may be a specific concern. For example, you could almost create a multi-stakeholder committee around the way licenses are issued, or the way the Natural Resources Fund is looted. There are some people that would overlook the fact that the monies in the Natural Resources Fund are being used far more liberally than was ever intended, liberally by this generation and this government, that was intended by the creation of that fund. And the solution to that, in my view, would be to formally engage a range of people in, we're calling it a multi-stakeholder committee. Within the statute of Natural Resources Fund, there is a civic committee that's supposed to be an oversight committee, but it's selected largely by people who are associated or unwilling to challenge the government. So it doesn't function. But it's an example of this collective governance that we need to spend more time encouraging and working on, so that the official ministerial and legal positions that are not being implemented can be challenged.
So Mike, thank you for having pivoted to the Natural Resources Fund, which is, the name, other countries call it a sovereign wealth fund. We heard last week from Christopher Ram, it's called, in Norway, their National Pensions Fund. So all citizens pay attention to it. Can you explain the difference to our listeners, the difference between income taxes, which Guyanese workers pay each year, versus the petroleum royalties, which are paid into the Natural Resources Fund?
The Natural Resources Fund comprises money that has been earned by selling the natural properties and mineral properties that belong communally to all Guyanese. There's private wealth that you earn by your work and different ways in which we earn money. And then the government takes part of that in taxes for the provision of services that we're all supposed to benefit from. The Natural Resources Fund already belongs not only to, it doesn't actually belong even to this generation. This generation is the protector of and the custodian of inherited wealth that has been passed on from generation to generation. And the future generations have every right to expect it will be handed on to them. The only justification for selling inherited wealth is that the full value of the asset is handed on instead of the asset itself. In other words, if you're going to sell oil, then all the money you earn from oil should go into the Natural Resources Fund. The Guyana government currently would say, that's fine, we do that. We put it all in the fund. But what they stop short of is they do not accept that that prevents them from simply accessing the fund. They've now legally granted themselves the right to 95% of the first $1 billion that goes in every year, and 90% of the second billion that goes in every year. And they virtually repossessed it as a government thing, the way they do taxes.
Yep. So sorry, go ahead.
The handing out of money as cash grants here is a weak way of what, for example, happens in Alaska. In Alaska, 30% of the sovereign fund in Alaska is handed out to every Alaskan gets a check in January. And that check is a nominal way of recognizing that the money belongs to them. And every Alaskan now can anticipate he can improve his house, or they can go on a trip somewhere, or they can do something special with that money. And it's acknowledged that belongs to them. It's not the government suddenly deciding they'll be generous and scatter 100,000 around, whether you need it or not. And if you are receiving it as 100,000, but you already earn far more than 100,000, then that money should be taxed back. But there's no evidence that it is. So the concept of intergenerational wealth is not acknowledged here. In fact, it, as happens in Norway, the money that goes into the fund should be reinvested, and the interest that those new investments make go into the fund, and they belong to this generation.
Yeah.
It's like if I inherit a farm from my forefathers, I can use the farm for my own benefits. Anything I grow on the farm belongs to me.
Yes.
But then the farm gets handed on to my children or the next generation.
Yes.
And that's applied to the fund as well. If the fund were invested, then the government would have some justification in the way it approaches the interest.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we don't even invest the fund. We leave it in a bank account in New York, so it's readily available for the government to write a check anytime it wants.
Yeah.
The central, not just to finish this, the central bank is supposed to be the body that oversights the way the Natural Resources Fund functions. We have never seen any reference in any of the bank's reports to anything other than the input of each lift of oil and how much it generates. There is no reference by the bank to what happens to the money that's supposedly used to pay the taxes of the oil companies, because that's the bank ought to be showing that as something, as another outflow from the fund, not just the money the government takes to support the budget.
So, right, Mike, in the last, we have only a few minutes left, and that you brought up a really important point, which I think has consumed many, as you mentioned, Guyanese who are living through a period of immense deprivation and austerity. You know, the cost of living is astronomical, very high. So we've heard recently from accountant Christopher Ram, from the economist Kenrick Hunt, that between 2020 and 2024, the taxes which should have been paid by the oil companies, just like you and I pay taxes, amounted to more than 5 billion Guyana dollars. The quarterly reports of the Natural Resources Fund do not show whether those taxes are paid by government on behalf of the consortium headed by Exxon. So are these taxes which are paid in lieu, are they reported to GYEITI by the Ministry of Finance or by the Ministry of Natural Resources?
It's a good question, that, Janet, because one we raised at the end of 2025 because it was clear that the Guyana Revenue Authority was not at all comfortable with whatever the manner in which this issue was being resolved. it actually led to a delay in the publishing of the report because while it was not discussed in the terms we're discussing it, it was clear there was something going on in that the Inland Revenue were resisting something that the government was trying to foist on them. We still don't know how it's been resolved, and it's an issue that is, and I mean, we recently saw that the companies are earning more than the government's earning.
Yeah. So,
And yet the government's paying their taxes.
yeah, and those taxes are not available to for the benefit of Guyanese in Guyana. So, our guest tonight, this evening, was Mr. Mike McCormack of Policy Forum Guyana. Mike, thank you for explaining to us how EITI functions internationally, how GYEITI, the Guyana branch or of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative functions, and how it should function, hopefully will function in the future. Listeners, thank you for listening. This was Oil Talk of the OGGN, Oil and Gas Governance Network. Good evening.